The lavender balloons bobbed against the perfect blue sky. But something felt wrong the moment I stepped out of our car. Bennett's hand found mine as we approached Colette's suburban home, his grip tighter than usual. "Look at this turnout," he murmured, his doctor's eyes scanning the crowd with methodical precision. She said intimate gathering. The house was draped in professional decorations, soft pastels, coordinated florals, a marble-topped bar where a uniformed bartender mixed mocktails. This wasn't the modest celebration Colette had described. "Sarah!" Colette squealed, arms outstretched. She stood radiant in a floor-length pink dress, blonde hair crowned with flowers. But as she embraced me, I noticed how she held herself, body angled away, the hug brief and controlled. "Don't squish the little one," she laughed, patting her rounded belly. Bennett's eyebrows rose slightly. As an obstetrician, he'd hugged hundreds of pregnant women. They didn't usually worry about gentle embraces at 4 months along. "Most of the decorations were donated," Colette explained quickly. "People have been so generous to support maternal health initiatives." Alaric appeared with champagne, his British accent sharp. "For the non-pregnant among us." Something passed between him and Colette, a look I couldn't decipher. "Congratulations," Bennett said. "First-time fatherhood is a big change." "The biggest," Alaric agreed, but his eyes darted nervously. I was pulled away by Sierra and Opal, old friends from high school, but I noticed Bennett hanging back, watching, during the gift opening. I saw him taking photos of the nursery mock-up, zooming in on details with clinical focus. "What's going on with you today?" I cornered him by the drinks table. "Just observing," he said, but his eyes continued scanning the room. That's when I saw him stiffen. A middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair stood near the gift table, watching Colette with deep concern. Bennett was already pulling out his phone, typing rapidly. "Who's that?" I whispered to Sierra. She shrugged. "Maybe one of Alaric's colleagues." As the photographer called for group photos, I followed Bennett's gaze and saw the man shaking his head slowly, as if witnessing something troubling. "We have to go," Bennett said abruptly, his voice low but urgent. "Now." "What?" "We can't just leave." "Sarah." His fingers wrapped around my wrist. His eyes bore into mine with startling intensity. "Trust me. We need to go." Something in his tone, absolute certainty, made me relent. I made quick apologies to Colette, blaming a hospital emergency. She pouted but accepted my excuse. As we drove away, lavender balloons still visible in the rearview mirror, the silence felt physical. "This better be good," I finally said. Bennett's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "That man was Dr. Nathaniel Harmon. He works with me at the hospital." My stomach dropped. "Her doctor?" "No. He works exclusively high-risk pregnancies at Mercy General. Colette goes to St. Elizabeth's." Bennett's voice was clinically detached. When we made eye contact, he looked deeply concerned. Maybe she switched. I overheard Alaric on the phone. He said, "She's starting to believe it herself. We need to speed this up." A chill ran through me. That could mean anything. "Sarah," Bennett said quietly, "I don't think Colette is actually pregnant." The highway stretched before us as I processed Bennett's words. 20 years of friendship with Colette, and he thought she was lying about pregnancy. "That's insane," I said, but even as I spoke, memories surfaced. Senior year, when she'd fainted dramatically in the cafeteria after her boyfriend broke up with her. She'd told me later she just needed everyone to see how much he'd hurt her. "What makes you think that?" I asked. "Medical observations," Bennett said gently. "No typical pregnancy changes. No swelling, no weight gain in her face, no apparent bladder pressure. And when was the last time you actually touched her stomach?" The question hit like a slap. I pictured every interaction over the past months, hugs that were always angled, always brief, always controlled. She doesn't like people touching her belly, I said weakly. Has she mentioned morning sickness, food aversions, back pain? I hadn't heard any of it. Colette's pregnancy had been, by her account, practically magical. There's more, Bennett continued. When I helped them move furniture last month, I saw medical reports on Alaric's desk, blood panels, Sarah, not consistent with pregnancy. You were snooping. They were in plain sight. I'm a doctor. I know what I'm looking at. I thought about Colette's pattern throughout our friendship. Her crises always seemed to coincide with my important moments. My wedding shower interrupted by her food poisoning. My promotion party cut short because she'd locked herself out. My miscarriage overshadowed because she'd announced her pregnancy the same week. Why would she do this? I whispered. Attention money. That shower wasn't cheap, and she said things were donated. What does that mean? The examples kept flooding back. College, she'd borrowed my scholarship essay, claiming she just wanted to see the structure. Got accepted to the same program. High school, the dramatic fainting that resulted in an ambulance call and a week of concerned attention. She's always needed support, I said defensively. Support or an audience? As we pulled into our driveway, doubt crept in like fog. There had always been something performative about Colette, something that needed validation. Even her proposal from Alaric had been elaborately staged for social media. What now? I asked. Bennett turned to me, his face grave. That's up to you. She's your friend. I nodded slowly. I need to find out the truth. We'll face it together, he agreed. But lying in bed that night, I realized I was about to investigate the person I'd trusted most in the world, 20 years of friendship, and I was starting to wonder if I'd ever really known her at all. Had I been making excuses for manipulative behavior all this time, the thought terrified me almost as much as Bennett's suspicions about the pregnancy. If he was right, if Colette had been lying about something this fundamental, then everything I thought I knew about our friendship was built on a foundation of deception. I needed proof, one way or another. I needed to know for certain. The next morning, I decided to act. Bennett had left early for his hospital shift, and I sat with cold coffee, replaying every detail from the shower, the untouched nursery setup, Colette's careful positioning, Alaric's nervous energy. I texted Colette, left my blue shawl at your place yesterday. Mind if I swing by? Her response came quickly. So sorry. Not home. Doctor appointment. Maid is here. Though she can let you in. Perfect. Colette's younger sister had always been less polished, more likely to let something slip. The drive to their renovated Victorian felt endless. I rehearsed questions, planned explanations for a shawl that didn't exist. Maid answered the door in sweatpants and messy hair, genuinely surprised to see me. Sarah, what brings you by? Left my shawl yesterday. Colette said you'd help me look. Of course, come in. Without the party crowd, the house felt hollow, staged. As I pretended to search, I noticed an open wine bottle on the dining table beside a plate with rare steak remnants. Alaric's late dinner, I asked casually. Murad flushed. From last night? Yeah. Seems rich for Colette these days, the wine especially. Oh, she didn't... Mairead caught herself, eyes widening. She had something else, pregnancy safe. My pulse quickened. How's she feeling? The pregnancy treating her well? Great, everything's perfect. The response came too fast, too rehearsed. Mind if I check the nursery? Maybe my shawl ended up there. I'll come with you, Muradi said quickly. Upstairs. The nursery looked exactly like yesterday, pristine and untouched. Every box unopened, every item still tagged and wrapped. It looked like a showroom, not a space being prepared for an actual baby. Colette wants everything perfect before opening anything, Murad explained. As she checked the closet, I spotted something behind the changing table, a small journal, wedged as if it had fallen. I slipped it into my purse. "Not here," Mairead announced. "Maybe downstairs." I made a show of searching, then headed for the door. Probably left it in my car anyway. Halfway to my vehicle, I heard voices from the side of the house. Instinctively, I ducked behind a hydrangea bush. Colette's voice carried through an open window, sharp and clear. "I don't care what he thinks. This will be over after the donation clears." My blood turned to ice. "What donation?" "Not backing out now," she continued, her voice lower. "Too much invested." Footsteps on gravel sent me scrambling to my car. I pulled away just as Colette rounded the corner, phone pressed to her ear, her expression cold and calculating. In my rearview mirror, I saw her watching my car leave, her free hand hanging at her side, not protectively cradling her belly like before. Once safely down the street, I parked and opened the journal with shaking hands. "My dearest daughter, though you're not yet in my arms, you're already in my heart. They don't understand. They say it's not possible. But mothers know. Mothers always know." The entry was dated 3 years ago. I flipped through pages of letters to this phantom child. The most recent entry, from 2 weeks ago, made my stomach drop. "The donations are flowing in. Soon we'll have everything we need. Just a little longer now, and no one will be able to take you away from me again." My phone buzzed. Colette. "Saw you driving away. Find your shawl." Before I could respond, another text. "I need to tell you something. Something I haven't told anyone. Can we meet tomorrow, private place? I've been keeping a secret too long." My hands trembled as I typed back. "Of course. When and where?" "The cabin at Lake Morrison. Noon. Come alone." I stared at the screen, dread and vindication washing over me in equal measure. Bennett had been right. But the scope of Colette's deception was apparently much larger than either of us had imagined, whatever secret she planned to share tomorrow. I suspected it wouldn't be the confession I was hoping for. More likely, it would be another manipulation, another carefully crafted performance designed to keep me from discovering the truth. But now I had the journal. Now I had proof that this had been going on for years. Tomorrow, at the cabin, one way or another, this would end. I called Bennett immediately, my hands shaking as I held the phone. "You were right," I said when he answered. "Something's definitely off." "What happened?" I told him about Murad's nervous behavior, the wine and steak, the untouched nursery. Then I read him the journal entries. "Keep the journal," he advised. "We might need it as evidence." Evidence of what exactly? Best case scenario. Some kind of delusional episode. Worst case fraud. After we hung up, I drove straight to the hospital. Bennett met me in the parking lot, still in his scrubs. "Show me everything," he said. We sat in my car as I handed him the journal. His expression darkened as he read. 3 years ago, he murmured. "That's when this started. Sarah, I need to tell you something else. Dr. Harmon pulled me aside today." My stomach clenched. "What did he say?" "He's seen Colette at 3 different charity events in the past 6 months. Each time, she was introduced as a pregnant spokesperson for maternal health. Each time, she was soliciting donations for her nonprofit. That's what she claimed, but he started asking around. The amounts she's been raising are substantial, tens of thousands of dollars from individual donors." I thought about what I'd overheard Colette saying about donations clearing. There's someone I need to call. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Penelope Graves, the elderly widow I'd met at a charity gala last year. She'd taken an interest in my counseling work with grieving parents. "Mrs. Graves. This is Sarah Walker. We met at the Bright Futures Gala. I was wondering if I could ask you about a donation you made to New Beginnings Maternal Care." What she told me next made my blood run cold. "Oh yes, dear. Such a lovely young woman, that Colette. When she told me about her pregnancy, after losing her first baby, my heart just broke for her. She promised the baby would be named after my late husband, Edward Eduardo, for a boy, Eduarda for a girl. She said it would be a living memorial to him, since the baby's father had agreed to it. How much did you donate, Mrs. Graves? $50,000 for a special memorial wing at their new birthing center. She was so passionate about helping other women who'd experienced loss. I closed my eyes. Mrs. Graves, I'm so sorry, but I have some very difficult news to share with you. 30 minutes later, I sat stunned in my car. Mrs. Graves had been devastated but grateful for the truth. She was already calling her lawyer. Bennett was waiting when I got home. How bad is it? $50,000 from Mrs. Graves alone. And Bennett, she specifically targeted her because of her grief. She promised to name the baby after Mrs. Graves' dead husband. Jesus. Bennett ran a hand through his hair. This isn't just fraud. It's predatory. I called Sierra next. Hey, can I ask you something? Did Colette ever approach you for money? Sierra's silence was answer enough. How much? I asked gently. $3,000 for the nursery. She said it was temporary, that a big design commission was coming through, but she needed to pay the contractor right away to secure the slot. Sierra's voice was small. There is no baby. Is there? No, I confirmed softly. There isn't. I feel like such an idiot. You're not. She manipulated you. That's what she does. After Sierra, I called Opal. The therapist answered on the first ring. I've been expecting your call, she said. You want to know if she asked me for money too? Did she? Not directly. But she talked a lot about her foundation's work, how they needed a mental health component, how perfect I would be to consult. Opal paused. I offered to volunteer my time. She seemed disappointed. What's your professional opinion? Factitious disorder, possibly with narcissistic personality features. In layman's terms, she's creating a false identity to get attention, sympathy, and now financial gain. The pregnancy is just the vehicle. That evening, I spread all the evidence across our dining room table. The journal, the financial information from Mrs. Graves, the photos Bennett had taken at the shower, the timeline we'd constructed. We have to report this, I said finally. Bennett nodded. Dr. Harmon is filing a formal complaint with the medical board and the police tomorrow. He's documenting everything he witnessed. And if Colette really is mentally ill, then she'll get help. But Sarah, this isn't just delusion. This is calculated. She's targeting vulnerable people, exploiting their grief for money. That's criminal behavior. I picked up the journal again, flipping to the most recent entries. The language had changed over time, becoming more calculating, more focused on the donations, and less on the imaginary baby. She's meeting me tomorrow at the lake cabin, I said. She wants to tell me the truth. I don't like it. What if she's dangerous? She's not dangerous, she's desperate. And I think she knows we're onto her. Bennett was quiet for a long moment. What are you going to do? I looked at the evidence spread before us, 20 years of friendship reduced to documents and timelines. I'm going to listen to what she has to say, and then I'm going to tell her it has to stop. And if she won't stop... I met his eyes, knowing my answer would change everything. Then I'll make sure she does. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I researched Colette's nonprofit online, diving deep into their website and social media presence. What I found made everything worse. New beginnings. Maternal care was legitimate. They did provide prenatal services to underserved communities. But over the past year, Colette had transformed herself into the face of the organization. Her bio described her as a maternal health advocate with personal experience of pregnancy loss and the miracle of conception after grief. The photos were damning. Colette at fundraising galas, hands cradling her belly, Colette speaking at conferences about hope after loss, Colette cutting ribbons at clinic openings, always positioned to show her growing bump. The comments on her posts were heartbreaking. Women sharing their own stories of loss, thanking Colette for giving them hope, donors explaining how her story had moved them to contribute. I called Bennett at the hospital. "It's worse than we thought. She's not just faking pregnancy, she's built an entire public persona around it. The nonprofit is real, but she's using her fake pregnancy to raise money." "How much money are we talking about?" I scrolled through the donation acknowledgments. "Conservatively, over $200,000 in the past 6 months. All from people who think they're supporting a pregnant woman who overcame loss. That's federal fraud. Sarah, wire fraud, mail fraud, probably tax fraud too." After Bennett hung up, I found myself staring at a photo from Colette's Instagram. She was speaking at a maternal health conference, microphone in hand, the other hand resting on her bump. The caption read, "Sharing our story of hope after loss. Baby girl Morrison will never know how many lives she touched before she was even born." Baby girl Morrison. She'd even given the fictional baby a name. My phone rang. Sierra. "Sarah, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. There's something else." Sierra's voice was tight. "Last month, Colette introduced me to this couple at an art gallery opening. They'd lost twins at birth. She told them our whole friend group was rallying around her pregnancy, how meaningful it was to have support after her miscarriage. What did they do? They commissioned a painting from me, a portrait of mother and child based on Colette's ultrasound photos, paid me $5,000 and said it was for her baby shower." I closed my eyes. Sierra, she's been using all of us, making us part of her story to make it seem more authentic. How could I not see this? I'm supposed to be observant. It's literally my job. "She's good at this," I said grimly. "She's had practice." I spent the rest of the morning making calls. Opal confirmed that Colette had name-dropped our entire friend group at therapy conferences, presenting us as her support system through her difficult pregnancy. Gage, Colette's brother, reluctantly admitted that she'd been borrowing money from him too small amounts at first, then larger sums for medical expenses. "I knew something was wrong," Gage said, his voice heavy with guilt. "But Mom and Dad were so excited about becoming grandparents, and Colette seemed so happy for the first time in years." "When did you start suspecting?" "A few weeks ago. I stopped by their house unannounced and found her in the nursery, just sitting in the rocking chair, not moving. When she saw me, she jumped up and started talking about feeling the baby kick, but—" He paused. "She looked surprised to see me there, like she'd forgotten she was supposed to be pregnant. By 11:30, I was driving toward Lake Morrison, my mind reeling from everything I'd learned. The scope of Colette's deception was staggering. She hadn't just lied to me, she'd created an entire false reality, involving dozens of people and hundreds of thousands of dollars. The lake was peaceful in the late spring sunshine, its surface rippling with gentle waves. The Whitman family cabin sat nestled among tall pines, its weathered wood and stone chimney a fixture of my childhood memories. I spotted Colette's white SUV parked under the carport. There was no turning back now, but as I approached the cabin, I noticed something that made me pause. Through the window, I could see Colette pacing, talking animatedly on the phone. She was gesturing with her free hand, her body language aggressive, demanding. "I don't care what the board says." I heard her voice carry through the screen door. "We're too close to back out now. The Graves donation clears Monday, and then we'll have enough to weather any investigation." I froze. She wasn't planning to confess. She was planning damage control. "No, I can handle Sarah," she continued. "She's loyal to a fault. Always has been. I just need to give her the right story." My heart pounded as I realized the truth. This wasn't a confession meeting. It was a manipulation session. Colette had figured out that I suspected something, and she was planning to spin me a story that would get me back on her side. I had two choices: confront her with what I knew, or play along and see how far she'd go. I knocked on the door, my mind made up. The door swung open, and there stood Colette, but not the radiant, expectant mother from yesterday's shower. This was someone I barely recognized. No bump, no glow, no performance, just Colette, her face bare of makeup, her blue eyes rimmed with red. "You knew," she said simply, not a question. I nodded, unable to find words. She stepped back, gesturing me inside. I should have realized Bennett would figure it out. Doctors notice things. The cabin's interior was dim, shafts of sunlight cutting through half-closed blinds. Colette moved to the worn leather couch and sat, curling her legs beneath her like she used to do in college. "Do you hate me?" she asked, her voice small. I remained standing, unsure of the script for this moment. "I don't hate you. I don't understand." She laughed, a brittle sound. "That makes two of us." I watched as she poured water from a pitcher on the coffee table. Her hands steady, no wine today, no performance. "I wasn't always lying," she began, staring into her glass. "A year and a half ago, I was pregnant. For real." My breath caught. "What?" 12 weeks. We hadn't told anyone yet. We were waiting for the first trimester to pass. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "I miscarried on a Tuesday. Alaric was in London for work. I was alone. Colette." I moved toward her, instinct overriding caution. "Why didn't you call me?" "Because you had just announced your promotion at the counseling center. Everyone was so proud of you." She shrugged. "I didn't want to steal your moment." The familiar guilt twisted in my gut, the constant push-pull of our friendship, where her needs and mine perpetually competed for oxygen. "After the miscarriage, I fell apart," she continued, "but secretly. No one knew except Alaric and my doctor. I started talking to the baby like she was still there, buying things, planning." I sat beside her, leaving space between us. And then I stopped accepting it. I started telling people I was newly pregnant, just to get through social events without having to explain why I wasn't drinking, why I looked so tired. Colette's hands fluttered to her still flat stomach. Alaric was worried, but he went along with it at first. He thought it was grief. When did it become this? I gestured vaguely at her, at the situation we were now in. She sighed. 6 months ago. I was supposed to speak at a maternal health fundraiser, for my nonprofit. But I had a panic attack before going on stage. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. I remembered, "You said you had food poisoning." "Another lie?" She smiled sadly. "Alaric found me hyperventilating in the bathroom. I kept saying I couldn't face them, couldn't tell them I'd failed. And then he said, 'What if you didn't have to?'" My blood ran cold. "He suggested you fake the pregnancy." "Not exactly. He suggested I could say I was newly pregnant, just to get through the event. We'd announce a loss later, after I'd had time to process privately." Colette's eyes met mine, hollow. But it felt so good. Sarah, the congratulations, the attention, the way people looked at me like I was special again. "So you kept going." "It snowballed. One event became another. A small bump became a bigger one, and then the donations started coming in." I frowned. "Donations?" Colette stood abruptly, moving to a desk in the corner. She returned with a folder full of papers. "Here," she said, spreading them on the coffee table. "See for yourself." The documents show donations, substantial ones from various businesses and individuals, all to Colette's nonprofit, $50,000 from the Graves Foundation, $25,000 from Hampton Healthcare Services, smaller amounts from dozens of other sources. The foundation is real, she explained. The work we do is real. We provide prenatal care to women in underserved communities. What isn't real is... She trailed off. You? I finished. Your pregnancy. She nodded, eyes downcast. I don't understand. Why would your pregnancy affect donations to your nonprofit? Because of who the donors are? Colette shuffled through the papers, pulling out several checks with familiar names. The Graves Foundation, the Williams Trust, Hampton Healthcare Services. They all have one thing in common. I scanned the names, recognition dawning. They all lost children, or grandchildren, or siblings. They donate to maternal health care because of personal tragedy. Colette's voice hardened slightly. And they connect with me because they think I understand their fear, the fear of losing a child. The calculation of it all stunned me. So the baby shower was essentially a fundraiser. Every gift, every decoration, all donated by companies that support New Beginnings. They get tax write-offs and publicity. We get supplies for our clinics. My mind raced to process this information. It was manipulative. Certainly. Deceptive. Absolutely. But criminal, I wasn't sure. Then I remembered what I'd overheard. What about Mrs. Graves specifically? You promised to name the baby after her dead husband. Colette's composure cracked. She was so lonely, so desperate to feel connected to something hopeful. I gave her what she needed. You exploited her grief for $50,000. For the foundation, Colette snapped. For women who actually need help. Using a lie. Using manipulation. I stood, pacing to the window. How many others? Colette. How many grieving families have you promised to name this fictional baby after their dead children? Her silence was answer enough. This has to stop, I said, turning back to her. Today, right now. I can't. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Sarah, I can't go to jail. The foundation will collapse. All those women we help, they'll have nothing. You should have thought of that before you started this performance. I know it was wrong, but I'll make it right. Once the final donation from Graves clears, it's for a new ultrasound machine for our mobile unit. I'll announce that I lost the baby. There'll be sympathy, not suspicion. No one will question it. The coldness of her planning chilled me. This wasn't grief or delusion speaking. This was calculation. And what about all the people who care about you, who've been worried about you, shopping for you, planning for you? What about their feelings? They'll recover, she said dismissively. People always do. I'm not sure I will, I admitted. Something shifted in Colette's expression. A flash of the girl I'd grown up with, vulnerable and real. I need you, Sarah. You're the only person who won't abandon me over this. The only one who will understand. The weight of 20 years of friendship pressed down on me. The sleepovers, the graduations, the weddings, the secrets shared and promises made, the times she'd been there for me, and the times she hadn't. But mostly, I thought about Mrs. Vaillier's Graves, sobbing over the phone about how she'd been convinced her husband's memory would live on in a baby that never existed. I won't cover for you anymore, I said quietly. This ends today. Colette, one way or another, her face hardened. If you expose me, you'll destroy everything I've built, everything I've worked for. You destroyed it yourself the moment you decided to lie. I gathered my purse, heading for the door. Sarah, she called after me. Think about this. Really think. Do you want to be responsible for taking away hope from hundreds of women who depend on our services? I turned back to her one last time. I want to be responsible for stopping someone from exploiting grieving families for money. There's a difference. As I drove away, the cabin growing smaller in my rearview mirror, I felt hollow. The Colette I thought I knew had disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized. And I knew that in a few hours, I would have to make the hardest decision of my life. I drove straight home, my mind reeling from Colette's calculated confession. She wasn't sorry she was angry at being caught. She wasn't planning to stop. She was planning to stage a fake miscarriage to cover her tracks. Bennett was waiting in the kitchen when I walked through the door, still in his scrubs from his hospital shift. "How bad is it?" he asked, taking one look at my face. "Worse than we imagined." I sank into a chair and told him everything: the real miscarriage, the escalating lies, the systematic targeting of grieving families, the promise to name a fictional baby after dead relatives. When I finished, Bennett was silent for a long moment. "She's not mentally ill, is she?" "Not in the way we thought. No, she's calculating. Predatory." I pulled out my phone. "I have to call Mrs. Graves back, and Dr. Harmon, and probably the police. Sarah." Bennett's voice was gentle. "Are you sure about this? Once you make these calls, there's no going back. Your friendship with Colette is over." I thought about the woman I'd just left at the cabin, cold, manipulative, unrepentant. "It's already over. It probably ended a long time ago, and I was just too loyal to see it." The first call was the hardest. Mrs. Graves cried when I told her about the promise to name the baby Edward, about how Colette had specifically targeted her because of her dead husband. "I thought she understood," Mrs. Graves whispered. "I thought she knew what it was like to lose someone." "I'm so sorry. Your lawyer should contact the district attorney's office. This is fraud." Dr. C. Harmon was next. "I've been documenting everything," he assured me. "Medical inconsistencies, the fundraising events, witness statements. We'll need your testimony, but we have enough to file charges." The police detective who took my call was thorough and professional. Yes, they'd been investigating New Beginnings maternal care for the past week. Yes, they'd like to speak with me tomorrow. And yes, they'd appreciate any documentation I could provide. I spent the evening typing up everything I remembered: dates, conversations, the journal entries, the financial information Mrs. Graves had provided. Bennett helped, adding his medical observations and Dr. Harmon's concerns. "She's going to know it was us," I said as we finished. "Good," Bennett replied. "Maybe it will save someone else from being victimized." My phone buzzed around 11 p.m. A text from Colette. "Saw the news vans outside the hospital. I know what you did. 20 years of friendship. And you chose to destroy me. I hope you can live with yourself." I showed Bennett the message. How did she find out so fast? Hospital gossip travels quickly. Someone probably saw Dr. Harmon talking to reporters. I was about to respond when another text came through. "You have no idea what you've just unleashed. The foundation will collapse. Hundreds of women will lose their health care. Their babies will suffer because of your self-righteousness. But you'll sleep well knowing you were morally superior. Won't you? She's trying to manipulate you even now," Bennett observed, "making you responsible for consequences that are entirely her creation." He was right. But it still hurt. The story broke online around midnight. Local nonprofit director accused of pregnancy fraud. By morning, it was everywhere: local news, social media, regional papers. The comments were brutal, ranging from shock to outrage to demands for criminal prosecution. Bennett was called in to speak with hospital administration, as was Dr. Harmon. Both provided statements about their observations and concerns. I spent the day fielding calls from reporters, detectives, and friends who had seen the news. Sierra called in tears, apologizing for not seeing the truth. Opal called to offer professional insights about the psychology of long-term deception. Gage called to say he was cooperating with investigators and felt terrible for not speaking up sooner. But it was the call from Alaric that surprised me most. "Sarah, it's Alaric. I wanted to thank you." "Thank me." "For ending this nightmare. I've been terrified for months, watching her spiral deeper into these lies. I tried to talk her out of it, but she threatened to hurt herself if I didn't support her story. You were a victim, too." I realized. I should have been stronger, should have gotten her help instead of enabling her. His voice broke. "But she's my wife. I loved her. I thought I could save her. Where is she now? Gone? Cleaned out our joint accounts this morning and disappeared. Left me a note saying I was weak and cowardly for not standing by her." My stomach dropped. How much money? Everything the foundation had. About $60,000. The police are looking for her now. After Alaric hung up, I sat in stunned silence. Colette wasn't just fleeing, she was stealing money meant for women's health care as she ran. Bennett found me that evening sitting in our backyard, staring at the sunset. "Any word?" he asked, settling beside me on the porch swing. "Nothing. She's disappeared completely." I leaned against his shoulder. I keep thinking about what she said, about the women who'll lose their health care because of what I did. "The women lost their health care because of what she did," Bennett corrected firmly. "Her lies, her theft, her manipulation. You didn't create this situation, you exposed it. I know that logically, but emotionally, you're mourning the loss of your oldest friendship. That's normal. That's healthy." He kissed the top of my head. "But don't let her manipulate you even in her absence. The guilt you're feeling, that's exactly what she wants you to feel." As night fell, I realized he was right. Even on the run, even exposed and disgraced, Colette was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to make herself the victim and me the villain. But for the first time in 20 years, I wasn't going to let her. The media attention exploded over the next 48 hours. What started as a local story about nonprofit fraud became a national conversation about pregnancy scams and the exploitation of grief. Camera crews camped outside our house. Reporters called at all hours. My photo appeared next to headlines like, "Friend who exposed pregnancy fraud speaks out." I gave one interview to the local news, mainly to correct misinformation. "This isn't about friendship," I said, looking directly into the camera. "This is about protecting vulnerable people from predators who exploit their pain for money." The interview seemed to resonate. The comment sections, which had initially been split between supporters and critics, shifted heavily in favor of accountability. But the real vindication came when other victims started coming forward. Mrs. Chen from the Chinese Cultural Center called to report that Colette had solicited a $15,000 donation 6 months ago, promising to name her baby after Mrs. Chen's infant grandson who had died of SIDS. The Martinez family from Sacred Heart Parish revealed they'd given $8,000 after Colette promised to honor their stillborn daughter's memory. By Thursday, the district attorney's office had documented over $300,000 in fraudulent donations, with victims in 4 different states. "She's been doing this longer than we thought," Detective Rodriguez told me during my formal interview. "The pregnancy scam was just her latest scheme. She's run similar cons with cancer fundraisers and disaster relief claims." I felt sick. For how long? We're still investigating, but at least 5 years, maybe longer. The nonprofit itself was placed under federal investigation. The legitimate work, the clinics, the mobile units, the actual healthcare services would continue under new management, but the organization Colette had built was essentially dead. Alaric filed for divorce and full cooperation with authorities. Murad moved back in with their parents, reportedly devastated by her sister's crimes. Gage started seeing a therapist to deal with his guilt over not reporting his suspicions sooner. Our friend group struggled with the revelations. Sierra blamed herself for being taken in by the art commission. Opal questioned her professional judgment for not recognizing the signs sooner. Even Bennett wrestled with whether he should have spoken up earlier instead of trying to protect my feelings. "We all enabled her," I said during one of our group dinners. Not maliciously, but by never questioning her stories, never pushing back when things didn't add up. "She was good at it," Opal observed. "Pathological liars often are. They create just enough truth to make the lies believable." The hardest part was the hate mail. Despite the evidence, despite the victims who'd come forward, some people still saw me as the villain who'd destroyed a pregnant woman's life. Anonymous letters arrived daily, accusing me of jealousy, vindictiveness, and betrayal. One letter, postmarked from 3 states away, was different, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. "Sarah, I know what you think of me now, what everyone thinks, but you don't understand what it's like to be forgotten, to be ordinary, to watch everyone around you achieve and succeed while you fade into the background." The pregnancy gave me purpose. It made me matter. For the first time in years, people cared about what I had to say, wanted to hear my stories, valued my opinions. Was it wrong? Maybe. But the foundation helped real people. We provided real services. The money wasn't for me. It was for women who needed health care. I won't ask for forgiveness because I know you'll never give it. But I want you to know that losing your friendship hurts more than losing everything else combined. You were the only person who ever saw me as worth knowing. Now I'll never be worth knowing to anyone again. Colette. I read the letter 3 times, then handed it to Bennett. "She's still doing it," I said, still trying to make herself the victim. "Are you going to respond?" I thought about it for a long moment, then shook my head. There's nothing left to say. 2 weeks later, Colette was arrested in Arizona, trying to board a bus to Mexico. She'd been working at a women's shelter, using a fake name, apparently preparing to start another con. The arrest made national news. Her mugshot showed a woman I barely recognized, hollow-eyed, aged, defeated. No performance left in her. She was extradited back to our state to face charges of wire fraud, mail fraud, and theft. The prosecutor's office estimated she could face 15 to 20 years in federal prison. I didn't attend her arraignment. I didn't need to see her anymore. But I did attend the victim impact hearings, where Mrs. Graves and the Martinez family and a dozen other grieving people spoke about how Colette's lies had re-traumatized them, how she'd weaponized their love for their dead children against them. She told me my grandson's spirit had guided her to me. Mrs. Chen testified, tears streaming down her face. She made me believe he was sending me a sign through her pregnancy. When I found out it was all lies, it felt like losing him again. That's when I finally understood the full scope of what Colette had done. She hadn't just stolen money, she'd stolen healing, hope, and closure from people who had already suffered the worst losses imaginable. The trial was scheduled for the following spring. By then, I hoped, we could all begin the long process of moving forward. 3 weeks after Colette's arrest, I thought the worst was behind us. The media attention had died down, the investigation was proceeding, and I was finally sleeping through the night again. Then, at 11:30 on a rainy Thursday evening, someone knocked softly on our front door. Bennett was upstairs taking a shower. I peered through the peephole and my blood ran cold. Colette stood on our porch, soaked to the skin, hair plastered to her head. No makeup, no designer clothes. Just Colette, broken and desperate and somehow much smaller than I remembered. "I know you're there," she said quietly. "Please, I just need to talk." My hands shook as I unlocked the door. She was supposed to be in jail awaiting trial. How was she here? "They released me on bail," she said, reading my expression. "My parents mortgaged their house." I didn't invite her in, but she pushed past me anyway, dripping on our hardwood floor. She moved like a sleepwalker, disconnected from her surroundings. "You look good," she said, studying my face. "Rested. Must be nice to sleep with a clear conscience." "What do you want?" "Colette?" She wandered into our living room, touching familiar objects, the throw pillow she'd given us for our wedding, the coffee table books we'd chosen together. "I wanted to see you, to explain. You explained plenty in your letter. That wasn't explanation. That was desperation." She sank onto our couch, curling into the same position she'd taken at the cabin. "I've been thinking a lot in jail. About what you said. About the people I hurt." I remained standing, ready to call 911 if necessary. "And you were right. About Mrs. Graves. About all of them. I told myself I was helping the foundation, but really I was just feeding something inside me that was always hungry." It was the first time she'd acknowledged the harm without deflecting blame, but I wasn't ready to forgive yet. "The prosecutor says you might get 20 years, I said. "I know." She looked up at me with hollow eyes. "My lawyer wants me to plead not guilty by reason of mental defect. Says we can argue I was delusional, that I really believed I was pregnant." "Were you delusional?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes, toward the end, it felt real. The baby felt real. But in the beginning..." She shook her head. "In the beginning, I knew exactly what I was doing." The admission hung between us like a confession. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're the only person who ever really knew me. The only one who might understand." Tears began sliding down her cheeks. "I'm scared. Sarah, I'm so fucking scared of what happens next." Before I could respond, I heard Bennett's footsteps on the stairs. He appeared in the doorway, hair still wet from his shower, and his face went hard when he saw Colette. "What is she doing here?" "She came to talk," I said. "She shouldn't be here. Isn't there a restraining order?" "No," Colette said quietly. "There's no restraining order." Bennett pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police." "Wait." I surprised myself by stopping him. "Give us 5 minutes." He hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. I'll be in the kitchen." Colette and I stared at each other in the sudden silence. "I came to ask you to testify for me at sentencing," she said finally. "What?" "Character witness. Tell them about the person I used to be, before everything went wrong. Maybe it would help convince the judge to be lenient." The audacity of it stunned me. After everything she'd done, she still thought she could manipulate me into helping her. "No," I said firmly. "Please. You're the only one who..." "No!" My voice was stronger now. "I won't lie for you anymore. I won't minimize what you did or make excuses for why you did it." Her face crumpled. 20 years of friendship, and you won't even... 20 years of friendship where I constantly made excuses for your behavior, covered for your lies, and enabled your manipulation of other people. I leaned forward. "I'm not doing it anymore. So what? You're just going to abandon me. I'm going to stop being part of the problem." She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. The mask she'd worn our entire friendship, the charm, the vulnerability, the magnetic need finally slipped away completely. "You self-righteous bitch," she spat. "You think you're so much better than me, but you enabled this. Every time you made excuses for me, every time you cleaned up my messes, you made this possible." "You're right," I said calmly. "I did enable you, and I have to live with that. But I'm not going to keep doing it." She stood abruptly, rage replacing desperation. "You ruined my life. You ruined your own life. I just stopped pretending otherwise." For a moment, I thought she might attack me. Her hands clenched into fists, her body coiled with fury. Then she seemed to deflate, the fight going out of her as quickly as it had come. "I loved you," she whispered. "You were my best friend." "I loved you too," I replied. "But I can't save you from the consequences of your choices, and I can't pretend that what you did was okay just because we have history." The sound of sirens in the distance made us both freeze. Bennett must have called anyway. "You need to go," I said. She nodded, moving toward the door like a zombie. At the threshold, she turned back one last time. "I hope you can live with this," she said. "I can," I replied. "For the first time in years, I actually can." She walked out into the rain just as the police cruiser pulled into our driveway. I watched through the window as they spoke with her briefly, then escorted her to her car to make sure she left. Bennett appeared beside me as her taillights disappeared into the night. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. "Free," I said finally. "For the first time since this all started, I feel free." Colette's trial began on a crisp October morning, 6 months after her arrest. I sat in the gallery with Bennett, watching as she was led into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, her once pristine appearance replaced by the pallor of someone who'd spent months in county jail. She'd refused the plea deal the prosecutor offered 5 years in federal prison in exchange for a guilty plea and full restitution. Her lawyer was arguing temporary insanity caused by grief over her miscarriage. I testified on the 3rd day, not as a character witness for Colette, but as a witness for the prosecution. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Janet Martinez, walked me through the timeline of discovery. "When did you first suspect the defendant was not actually pregnant? When my husband, who is an obstetrician, noticed medical inconsistencies at her baby shower." "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Her body showed none of the typical changes associated with a 5-month pregnancy. No swelling, no weight gain in her face or extremities, no apparent discomfort from the baby pressing on her bladder." Colette's lawyer objected repeatedly, but the judge allowed my testimony. I spoke about the journal, the financial manipulation, the targeting of grieving families. I was careful to stick to facts, not emotions. During cross-examination, Colette's lawyer tried to paint me as a jealous friend who'd betrayed someone in the midst of a mental health crisis. "Isn't it true, Ms. Walker, that you resented Ms. Morrison's pregnancy because you yourself had recently suffered a miscarriage?" The question hit like a physical blow. My miscarriage the previous year had been private, painful, something I'd shared with only a few people, including Colette. "My personal medical history is not relevant to this case," I managed, "but isn't it true that seeing your friend pregnant made you jealous?" "No," I said firmly. "I was happy for her. That's why it took me so long to believe she was lying." The prosecutor objected, and the judge sustained it. But the damage was done. Colette had shared my most private pain with her lawyer to use as a weapon against me. Mrs. Graves testified the next day, her voice shaking as she described how Colette had promised to name her baby after Mrs. Graves's dead husband. "She said it would be like having Edward back in the world," Mrs. Graves told the jury. "She made me believe my grandson would have a namesake, someone to carry on his memory. When I found out it was all lies, it felt like losing him all over again." The Martinez family testified about their daughter, Mrs. Chen spoke about her grandson, one by one. Colette's victims took the stand and described how she had weaponized their grief for money. Colette herself never testified. Her lawyer's strategy seemed to be painting her as mentally ill rather than criminally responsible. They brought in a psychiatrist who diagnosed her with complicated grief and suggested she genuinely believed she was pregnant due to a psychological break. But the evidence was overwhelming. The financial records, the systematic targeting, the escalating lies over months and years. This wasn't temporary insanity, it was calculated fraud. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Colette's face showed no emotion as the verdict was read. She stared straight ahead, almost catatonic, as if the proceedings were happening to someone else. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. In the weeks leading up to it, I received dozens of victim impact statements to review. The prosecutor wanted me to understand the full scope of Colette's crimes before I decided whether to speak at sentencing. There were more victims than even the prosecution had initially realized. A cancer fundraiser she'd organized 3 years ago where she'd claimed to be undergoing chemotherapy. A disaster relief effort where she'd falsely claimed her house had been destroyed in a tornado. A veterans charity where she'd posed as a wounded veteran's wife. The pattern was always the same: identify vulnerable people, craft a compelling but false narrative, exploit their emotions for money. She'd stolen over $500,000 over the course of 5 years. She's a predator. Detective Rodriguez told me during one of our final interviews, she systematically targets people at their most vulnerable and exploits their desire to help others. The night before sentencing, I sat in our backyard with Bennett, trying to decide if I wanted to give a victim impact statement. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," he said. "You've been through enough. But maybe it would help the other victims to know they weren't alone, that even her best friend was manipulated. What would you say? I'd been thinking about that for weeks. That I enabled her by making excuses for behavior I should have questioned. That friendship doesn't mean blind loyalty. That we all have a responsibility to hold the people we love accountable." Bennett nodded. "That sounds like something worth saying." The sentencing hearing was packed. Colette had become something of a media sensation, the beautiful blonde who'd faked pregnancy to steal money from grieving families. The story had everything reporters loved: deception, manipulation, betrayal, and the destruction of lifelong friendship. Mrs. Graves spoke first, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "Colette Morrison didn't just steal money from me," she said, looking directly at the defendant. "She stole my hope. She made me believe my husband's memory would live on in a child that never existed. That betrayal will stay with me for the rest of my life." The Martinez family spoke about their daughter. Mrs. Chen talked about her grandson. One by one, Colette's victims shared their pain, their anger, and their slow journey toward healing. When my turn came, I walked to the podium with shaking hands. "Your Honor, I was Colette Morrison's best friend for 20 years. I trusted her completely, defended her constantly, and made excuses for behavior that I should have questioned long ago. I could see Colette from the corner of my eye, but I focused on the judge. The defendant is skilled at identifying what people need emotionally and providing just enough of it to gain their trust. She targets people who are grieving, lonely, or desperate for connection. She makes them feel special, chosen, important." I paused, gathering my courage. But friendship, real friendship, doesn't mean enabling harmful behavior. It means holding the people we love accountable for their actions. I failed to do that for 20 years. And in doing so, I helped create the conditions that allowed her to victimize others. The courtroom was silent. I can't undo the damage my enabling caused, but I can make sure it never happens again. Colette Morrison is not a victim of mental illness or grief. She is a calculating predator who has spent years perfecting her ability to exploit human compassion. She belongs in prison, not just for what she stole, but for the trust she violated and the healing she destroyed. When I finished, I could hear Mrs. Graves crying softly in the gallery, but I also felt something I hadn't expected: relief. I had finally told the truth about Colette, publicly and completely. Colette's lawyer made a final plea for leniency, arguing that she was a first-time offender who'd lost everything. The prosecutor countered that the systematic nature of her crimes and the vulnerability of her victims warranted the maximum sentence. Judge Harrison deliberated for 20 minutes before returning to the bench. "Ms. Morrison, You have been convicted of multiple counts of wire fraud, mail fraud, and theft. The evidence shows a pattern of calculated deception spanning multiple years and targeting some of our community's most vulnerable members. Colette stood, flanked by her lawyers. While the court acknowledges that you may have experienced genuine grief over your miscarriage, that grief does not excuse or explain the systematic exploitation of others who were also grieving. You weaponized human compassion for personal gain. The judge paused, reviewing her notes. The court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, which totals $547,000. Colette's knees buckled slightly, but she remained standing. 12 years. She would be 43 when she got out, assuming she served her full sentence. As the bailiff led her away, she turned to scan the gallery one last time. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I saw something I'd never seen in her before acceptance. Not of responsibility, necessarily, but of consequences. The media circus continued for a few more weeks, but gradually died down as new stories captured public attention. Life began to return to something approaching normal. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Sarah Kellum, to work through my own role in enabling Colette's behavior. It was humbling to realize how many red flags I'd ignored, how many excuses I'd made, how completely I'd been manipulated. Narcissistic individuals are often very skilled at identifying and exploiting the personality traits that make someone a good friend. Dr. Kellum explained during one of our sessions. Your loyalty, your empathy, your desire to see the best in people, these are positive qualities that she weaponized against you. But I should have seen through it sooner. Perhaps, but you were operating from a position of love and trust. She was operating from a position of calculation and manipulation. Those aren't equal playing fields. Bennett and I grew closer through the ordeal. The crisis had tested our marriage in ways I hadn't expected, but we'd emerged stronger. He'd supported me through every difficult decision, never pushing, but always offering perspective. Our friend group struggled more. Sierra blamed herself for falling for the art commission. Opal questioned her professional judgment. Gage continued therapy to deal with his guilt over not reporting his suspicions sooner. We all enabled her, I said during one of our rare group dinners. Not maliciously, but by never questioning her stories, never pushing back when things didn't add up. She was good at it, Opal observed. Pathological liars often are. They create just enough truth to make the lies believable. 6 months after the trial, I received an unexpected call from the director of New Beginnings Maternal Care. The organization had been restructured under new leadership and was slowly rebuilding trust in the community. We're starting a support group for people who've been victimized by someone they trusted. She told me, "Would you consider facilitating it? Your experience with long-term manipulation could help others recognize the signs." I thought about it for a week before saying yes. If my experience could help others avoid what Mrs. Graves and the other victims had gone through, then maybe some good could come from the wreckage of my friendship with Colette. The support group met weekly in a small conference room at the community center. We had 15 regular members, people who'd been financially exploited by family members, emotionally manipulated by romantic partners, or professionally sabotaged by trusted colleagues. The hardest part, said Janet, a woman whose sister had stolen her identity and run up massive debts, is that everyone expects you to forgive them because they're family. Or because you have history, added Mike, whose business partner had embezzled their company's payroll. People don't understand that love doesn't mean accepting abuse. Week by week, we shared our stories, our guilt, our anger, and slowly, our healing. I learned that manipulation takes many forms, but follows predictable patterns. The love-bombing phase where the manipulator makes you feel special. The isolation phase where they separate you from other perspectives. The exploitation phase where they use your emotions against you. The punishment phase where they make you responsible for their consequences. Understanding the pattern helped me see that what had happened with Colette wasn't unique. I wasn't uniquely stupid or naive. I was simply human, with human needs for connection and loyalty that she had exploited. A year after the trial, I received a letter from federal prison. I recognized Colette's handwriting immediately, but almost threw it away without reading it. Curiosity 1. Sarah, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to say this whether you read it or not. I've been in therapy here. Real therapy. Not the performance I put on for the trial. Dr. Martinez says I have narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features. In layman's terms, I'm a predator who lacks empathy. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even think I deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand now what I took from you. Not just money or time, but your ability to trust your own judgment. Your confidence in your ability to see people clearly. You were the best friend I ever had, and I destroyed our friendship not through carelessness but through calculation. I used your love against you in ways that were both sophisticated and cruel. I hope someday you'll be able to trust that completely again. You deserve friends who see your loyalty as something to treasure, not something to exploit. I hope I never see you again. For your sake. Colette. I read the letter 3 times, then filed it away in a box with other documents from the case. It might have been genuine remorse, or it might have been another manipulation. At this point, it didn't matter. What mattered was that I had learned to protect myself from people who saw kindness as weakness and loyalty as opportunity. 2 years after Colette's sentencing, I stood in the memorial garden that had been created with the recovered funds from her fraud. Mrs. Graves had worked with the city to design a space dedicated to pregnancy and infant loss, with small plaques honoring children who had died too soon. The garden was beautiful, peaceful paths, winding through carefully tended flower beds, with benches positioned to catch the morning sun. A small fountain provided gentle background noise, and wind chimes hung from several trees. Edward Morrison Graves, read one plaque. Beloved grandson, your memory lives on in the hearts that loved you, not in the lies that exploited that love. Mrs. D. Graves had insisted on including Morrison in the inscription not to honor Colette, but to ensure that no one forgot how predators could weaponize grief. I visited the garden monthly, usually bringing flowers for the fountain. It had become a place of reflection for me, somewhere to think about the difference between healthy loyalty and enabling behavior. My support group had grown to over 30 members. We'd started offering workshops on recognizing manipulation, setting boundaries, and rebuilding trust after betrayal. The work was healing for everyone involved. Bennett and I had started trying for a baby. After my miscarriage and everything with Colette, the idea of pregnancy felt complicated. But we were both ready to move forward. We'd learned to communicate more directly, to question assumptions, and to trust each other's instincts. Our friend group had evolved too. Sierra had moved to Portland for a teaching position at an art college. Opal had specialized further in trauma therapy and often referred clients to our support group. Gage had finished his master's degree and started working at a nonprofit that provided legal aid to fraud victims. We stayed in touch but no longer felt obligated to maintain relationships that had been built on shared enabling of Colette's behavior. It was sad, but also liberating. I kept one photo of Colette and me from our childhood 2 8-year-old girls at a sleepover, making silly faces at the camera. I wasn't sure why I kept it. Maybe as a reminder that the person I'd loved had been real, even if everything that came after was performance. 3 years post-trial, I got a call from a journalist writing a book about long-term manipulation in friendships and families. She wanted to interview me about my experience with Colette. What would you want people to understand about this kind of relationship? she asked. I thought about it carefully. That predatory people are often very good at identifying and exploiting the qualities that make someone a good friend or family member. Loyalty, empathy, the desire to see the best in people, these aren't weaknesses, but they can be weaponized. How do you protect yourself without becoming cynical? You learn the difference between healthy skepticism and paranoid suspicion. You trust people gradually and watch whether their actions match their words over time. And you surround yourself with people who encourage you to trust your instincts rather than making excuses for behavior that feels wrong. Do you regret exposing Colette? No. I regret enabling her for so long. I regret the harm my enabling caused to her eventual victims. But exposing her, that was the most loving thing I could have done for everyone involved, including her. The interview was published 6 months later as part of a larger article about manipulation in close relationships. I received dozens of emails from people sharing their own stories, friends who'd stolen money, family members who'd lied about illnesses, romantic partners who'd fabricated entire identities. The common thread in all the stories was the same good people trying to love someone who was systematically exploiting that love for personal gain. I started speaking at conferences about recognizing and responding to manipulation. The work felt important, necessary. If my experience could help others avoid being victimized, then something meaningful had come from the wreckage. On the 5th anniversary of Colette's sentencing, I received an unexpected call from the federal prison where she was serving her sentence. Ms. Walker, this is Warden Patricia Hendricks. I'm calling to inform you that inmate Morrison has been found dead in her cell. Apparent suicide. The news hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything, despite the manipulation and lies and harm, Colette had been a part of my life for 20 years. Her death felt like the final page of a story I'd never wanted to read. Was there a note? I asked. I can't share specifics, but her personal effects will be released to her family. If there's anything meant for you, they'll let you know. 3 weeks later, Mairead called. Colette had left me something, not a letter, but a small wooden box I recognized from her childhood bedroom. Inside was a collection of photos from our friendship summer camps, high school graduation, college parties, wedding preparations. All from before the lies consumed everything. At the bottom of the box was a single piece of paper with 2 words written in Colette's familiar handwriting, "Thank you." I wasn't sure what she was thanking me for 20 years of friendship, for exposing her crimes, for stopping her before she could hurt more people, for giving her the consequences she'd never been forced to face before. Maybe all of it. Maybe none of it. What I did know was that the story was finally over. Not with redemption or reconciliation, but with an ending that felt complete if not satisfying. I kept the photos, but donated the box to a local women's shelter. The thank you note I burned in our backyard fire pit, watching the words disappear into smoke and ash. Bennett found me there as the fire died down to embers. "How do you feel?" he asked, the same question he'd asked the night Colette left our house for the last time. I thought about it honestly. Sad, I said finally, but also grateful. Grateful that I learned to choose truth over loyalty, boundaries over enabling, accountability over unconditional support, and grateful that I learned these lessons in time to build healthier relationships going forward. He sat beside me on the garden bench we'd installed near the fire pit. "Including with our daughter." I looked at him, surprised. We'd been trying for 6 months, but I hadn't taken a test yet. "Are you telling me something?" I asked. He grinned. "I'm telling you that you missed your period by 8 days, and you're usually clockwork regular." I calculated quickly. He was right. "Dr. Morrison Walker," I said, using the hyphenated name I'd considered but ultimately rejected when we married. "Are you diagnosing me? I'm suggesting you might want to take a pregnancy test." 2 hours later, We sat in our bathroom staring at 2 pink lines. "This is different," I said, resting my hand on my still flat stomach. "This is real." "Yes," Bennett agreed, kissing my forehead. "This is real." And for the first time in years, I trusted completely in my ability to tell the difference.